All they wanted to do was help. Monday morning on August 28, 2017, as floodwaters were rising fast in their neighborhood in northeast Houston, 3 brothers, Yahir, Jose, and Benjamin Bezuth, set out on a boat with their 2 friends, George Perez and Gustavo Rodriguez Hernandez, to rescue victims of the Hurricane Harvey flooding. Along the way, they picked up 2 journalists from DailyMail.com. In 2 trips, they brought 2 families, 7 people in total, to safety. Then they decided to go out for a 3rd rescue mission, this time to help the elderly woman who was wheelchair-bound. Everybody told them to stay, that they had already done their part, said Stephanie Jaquez, 25, a family member. But they said, "No, we have to go back. There's a lot of people in danger." By 2:50 p.m., they were hauling their boat on its trailer down the street, preparing to put it back in the water for more rescues. Minutes later, they were in high water and in high spirits. The men never could have predicted the dark turn their afternoon would soon take. Just about 20 minutes later, Benjamin Bezuth posted his last Facebook Live video of the day. It was 3:07 p.m. It shows the rescuers along with the DailyMail.com journalist in the boat. At one point, one of the men is knee-deep in water walking down what appears to be a heavily flooded street. The boat passes flooded gas stations as the men battle heavy rains and gusting winds. It's hard to hear what they're saying, but there does not appear to be any sense of panic. The video lasts for about 7.5 minutes. About 10 minutes after that, they lose control of their boat in strong currents and drifted toward downed power lines, throwing off sparks. Yahir Bezuth, 25, and George Perez, 31, were later found dead. Yahir's brother, Benjamin Bezuth, 31, and family friend Gustavo Rodriguez Hernandez, 40, who owned the boat and was driving it, are missing after being swept away in the water. Eventually, their bodies were later discovered on the banks of Greens Bayou. A 3rd brother, Jose Bezuth, 30, was found clinging to a tree on Tuesday with burns, along with news photographer Rudar Canalin, 26, and reporter Alan Butterfield, the journalist, on assignment for the London-based news site DailyMail.com. Canalin, who spoke with the Telegraph from a hospital room, recalled everyone jumping off the boat and into the fast-moving water upon seeing the craft approaching sparks emitted by the power lines. "I just felt this electric current go through my body and I thought I was done for," he said. Then it stopped, but it started again. I could see 4 of the men lying in the water, one of them floating on his back in his life jacket. Canellan said he and the 2 other men scrambled to grab hold of anything they could as they were pulled by what he estimated as a 30-mile-per-hour current. Butterfield and Jose Bezuth managed to grab onto a passing tree and pull themselves out of the water. Canellan also caught hold of the tree, but said he initially couldn't muster the strength to pull himself onto it. Jose Bezuth tried to save his brother, but the current was so fast he wasn't able to reach him. As the men clung for their lives, they shouted for help. At times, they said they saw rescue helicopters flying around overhead, but none spotted them. It wasn't until about noon on Tuesday, more than 20 hours after the boat struck the power lines, that they were rescued by members of the Texas Department of Public Safety. By then, the 3 men had suffered frostbite to their hands and toes and required antibiotics after spending so long in the filthy water. In 2018, Alan Butterfield filed a lawsuit against CenterPoint Energy, Inc. and the State District Court in Houston, seeking more than $1 million in damages for negligently failing to shut off the power lines while rescue attempts were being made for trapped survivors. On April 20th, 2015, a 32-year-old woman named Sabrina was beaten badly by her partner, Paul Hopkins. She managed to call 999 and threw the phone under her bed. Thames Valley Police received her call but could only hear screams in the background. The disturbing call cuts off after 2 minutes. Police knew something was wrong, so they tracked the position of the mobile phone and went on for a rescue mission. They arrived at her address 7 minutes later. In very disturbing footage caught on police officers' body camera, Sabrina can be seen crying and obviously in great distress. Her whole face is completely swollen, her nose is bleeding, and she has bruises all over her face and body. The attack is so violent she could not even see in one of her eyes. But Paul still insists they are just talking and that he did nothing wrong to her. Police didn't buy it and arrested him on suspicion of assault. Sabrina told the police she's been beaten by Paul for over 6 hours. She said it started with just a couple of little slaps in the face, and then it just escalated. He throws a chair on her head, and then he picked up the speaker underneath it, held it above his head, and was going to throw it on her head. And then she screamed to him, "Please stop, you're going to kill me." Paul said, "I don't care because I hate you." She explains, "I've never been so frightened. I honestly thought I was going to die." She said if the police hadn't come, Paul would have done it. According to her, she got to the point while he was beating her. It was like, "Please let this next punch kill me because then it will stop." Sabrina and Paul have been together for 5 years. Paul has been violent before, but this is the worst attack Sabrina has ever suffered. Sabrina was stomped on and had a chair thrown at her, but despite horrific facial injuries, she somehow escaped without broken bones, meaning the CPS decided to charge Paul with ABH rather than the far more serious GBH. Paul eventually pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of actual bodily harm, ABH. Though the available tariff for ABH is 5 years, and the Crown Prosecution Service prosecutor assured police it was the worst case of ABH she had seen, Paul was given just 2 years in jail, with 9 weeks added from a previous unspent sentence. He is likely to serve half that. Sabrina says she is frightened of what Paul might do to her when he is released, but she is also enraged that he won't be in prison for longer. He should have got 5 years. The judge looked through the pictures and said she'd never seen anything like it. She knew he'd been in prison before for the same thing. Sabrina believes that the police and the domestic abuse unit and the police stations handled it brilliantly, but not the justice system. They don't understand because by the time you get to court, the bruises have gone, and if the defendant pleads guilty, the judge doesn't have to listen to me explaining what I went through for years, she says. Paul will be released just over a year after the attack that Sabrina thought was going to end her life. The restraining order imposed on him doesn't make her feel safe, and with no requirement imposed by the court for him to attend anger management sessions or undertake therapy, she doesn't think other women are either. What he got just wasn't worth what I went through, she says. I don't want to hear in the future that Paul Hopkins has been arrested for murder because he's beaten someone else. On Saturday, March 7, 2015, at about 12:45 p.m., a fisherman noticed a car upside down in the Spanish Fork River, about 50 miles south of Salt Lake City. According to him, he could see a hand inside and called the police. By the time rescuers got there, they found an 18-month-old toddler, Lily Grossbeck. It is reported that Lily spent 14 hours upside down in a vehicle that had plunged off an overpass and into the Utah River. She was close to death. A week after her dramatic rescue, newly released footage shows the desperate effort to free the child from the smashed wreckage, where she remained strapped to her car seat as it dangled several inches above ice-cold water and certain death. The video begins with an officer rushing down a steep embankment before entering the water and joining other rescuers attempting to get inside the deadly vehicle. After an attempt to open a heavily dented car door fails, rescuers decide their best option is to flip the vehicle on its side. The men can be heard grunting and groaning as they struggle to lift the smashed four-door vehicle as freezing water swirls around them. The water was so cold that 7 emergency responders were treated for hypothermia after they entered the water to perform the rescue. Moments later, a small child is pulled from the wreckage and being passed from one man to the next until the toddler ends up in the back of an ambulance where she receives CPR. The toddler's mother, 25-year-old Lynn Jennifer Grossbeck, was killed in the accident, which took place about 10:30 p.m. Friday. Grossbeck had taken her daughter to visit her parents in Salem and were driving to their home in nearby Springville, a suburb of Provo. Grossbeck, a lifelong Utah resident and the youngest of 5 children, had dreams of becoming a medical assistant because she enjoyed helping others. According to family members, she enjoyed being outdoors and spending time with loved ones, but it was her daughter that she was most passionate about. In a mysterious twist, 4 of the rescuers involved told the Deseret News the next day that they recalled hearing a voice calling for help as they neared the car. However, when they flipped the vehicle, which had been resting on its hood, they discovered that nobody inside was capable of speaking. "We were down on the car and a distinct voice says, 'Help me, help me,'" Officer Brian DeWitt recalled. "It wasn't just something that was just in our heads. To me, it was plain as day because I remember hearing a voice," Officer Tyler Beddoes said. "I think it was DeWitt who said, 'We're trying our best to get in there.'" "How do you explain that?" "I don't know," he said, adding that the voice didn't sound like a child. "It was a positive boost for every one of us because I think it pushed us to go harder a little longer. I don't think that any one of us had intended on flipping a car over that day," Beddoes said. "We know there was some other help there, getting us where we needed to be." After prying open a door, rescuers unhooked Lily from her car seat and noticed her eyes were still fluttering. They began passing her up the hill to safety. Lily's father, Devin Trafney, 34, was working out of state at the time of the wreck and traveled back to Utah to see his daughter when he received news of the wreck. Lily was transported to Primary Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City and is listed in critical condition. A few days later, this was the dramatic moment a passing tour boat rescued dozens of stranded tourists after their vessel sank in rough seas in Phuket, Thailand. 42 passengers were on board the Serenata yacht, which capsized at the same time as the Phoenix diving boat carrying 101 people. Passing speedboat the Illuminous II heard a mayday call from Serenata and braved the deadly conditions to rescue all of the people on board. Tragically, many of those from the Phoenix boat, which was sailing nearby, died or are still missing after it sank. Without the tour guide firm Love Andaman, which is seen in the footage saving dozens from the second sinking vessel, the death toll is likely to have been much higher. The tragedy happened on July 5, 2018, and the preparations for the rescue of the 13 football players stuck inside the Tham Luang caves in Chiang Rai were in full swing. The young men had been located. There was rain on the way, and there was an urgent need to get them out before further monsoonal rains would make the task even riskier. Everyone understood the urgency, and the world media was there to provide the latest soundbite or video grab for a global audience. It was a big story. Meanwhile, on an otherwise ordinary afternoon, 2 tour boats, Phoenix and Serenata, were heading back to Phuket after a half-day tour of snorkeling near Koh Raka. The weather forecast was for seasonal monsoonal southwest winds and waves, about the usual for that time of the year. There was also a weather warning for a storm later in the afternoon. For whatever reasons, the captains of the 2 vessels started heading back to Phuket, despite the warnings or perhaps in full ignorance of them. Even a look to the southwest horizon would have indicated some poor weather was on the way. Phoenix was carrying 101 passengers, 89 tourists, all but 2 were Chinese, 11 crew, and a tour guide. As the boats were off Khoi Hai, southwest of Phuket, a storm front, now looming large as it reached the 2 boats, whipping up waves. The height of the waves was reported to be up to 5 meters by the captain of Phoenix, but was more likely around 3 meters. A boat of the size of Phoenix, in capable hands, should have handled the conditions, whilst uncomfortable for the passengers, with relative ease. But according to investigators, Phoenix wasn't just a standard purpose-built 29-meter diving boat. It had some major design and construction flaws which would contribute to the death toll on the day. Loose concrete blocks had been placed into the boat bilge to provide ballast and stability. These concrete blocks would shift as the boat started capsizing and make a bad situation worse. The boat had 1 watertight door. It should have had 4. And the windows, smashing when the water hit them, were not marine-grade glass. According to one of the survivors of the tour boat, there was no warning, no advice from crew beyond get out. He said they didn't know what was going on. The boat was shaking, and passengers, although remaining silent, were clearly frightened. Suddenly, the boat started lurching and tipping over. people started screaming. Most were still below decks because of the rain. Few were wearing life vests or buoyancy vests. Suddenly, they were in the water. Eventually, many of the survivors would be found to be wearing non-compliant buoyancy vests. Other witness reports say that the Thai crew and captain, all saved on the day, were the first to get off the boat, leaving more than half the passengers below decks and many others floundering around in the water. The survivor said he struggled onto one of the life rafts, dragged in by other bewildered passengers. By this stage, the boat had sunk. He adds that if they had known there would be a big rubber boat floating around after their boat sank, they might have first put on life vests and jumped in the vicinity to be saved. However, we knew nothing about it. No one gave us any warnings or guidance. The vessel's final journey ended at the bottom of the Andaman Sea, along with almost half of the trapped passengers inside the cabins. 13 children died in this disaster. Many were later found dead, floating face down, not far from their deceased parents. In total, 47 people died as a result of the Phoenix sinking. The other boat, Serenata, had also sunk off Koh Mai Tan, but its 42 passengers were all rescued. The capsize of Phoenix PC diving was one of the worst maritime disasters in Thai history, and its consequences have been far-reaching, particularly on the country's tourism sector. Phoenix PC Diving was operated by TC Blue Dream, a Thai firm established and registered in 2016 by a Thai woman, Warlock Rushilakan, 26. She is married to a Chinese national and owns more than 90% of the company's shares. Following the tragedy, Warlock was arrested and charged with recklessly causing death and injury. Her husband, whom authorities suspect of using Thai nominees to operate businesses in Thailand, allegedly fled the country to China. Following the capsize of the Phoenix PC Diving, Thai authorities have beefed up security measures related to tourist boats and tour companies to ensure more safety in marine tourism. On July 2, 2008, Colombian soldiers went on a rescue mission called Operation Jacques, a daring rescue operation that set free 15 rebel-held hostages, including Ingrid Betancourt, a former Colombian presidential candidate, 3 Americans who all worked for Northrop Grumman and were captured in 2003 after their light aircraft crashed in the jungles while on a counter-narcotics operation, and 11 other hostages held for years in jungle captivity from leftist guerrillas. Betancourt, 46, was the highest-profile captive held by the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, known as the FARC, Latin America's oldest surviving left-wing insurgency. A former presidential candidate, her dual French-Colombian nationality had helped bring world attention to the plight of hostages held by the rebels. Betancourt was kidnapped by the FARC in 2002 and was last seen in a rebel video at the end of 2007 looking ill, gaunt, and despondent. The 15 hostages were rescued after Colombian soldiers disguised as rebels arrived at a FARC jungle hideout and tricked the guerrillas into handing them over, ostensibly to be transferred to another FARC site. The Colombian military intelligence agents flew to the jungle aboard a white helicopter, staging a mock humanitarian mission that rebels were told would ferry their hostages to another camp for talks on a prisoner swap. Defense Minister Juan Manuel Santos said the would-be envoys had honed their accents and acting lessons, Italian, Arab, Caribbean Spanish, and Australian English, and that the elaborate ruse intentionally mimicked 2 hostage handovers brokered by the Venezuelan president Hugo Chavez that year, when Venezuelan helicopters carrying International Red Cross observers picked up 6 hostages. In the last 2 handovers of hostages, Santos told reporters, there was always a cameraman sent by Chavez. The video shows a small team of unarmed, disguised Colombian commandos landing in a field of coca bushes in Guaviare Department in southeast Colombia, where they were met by a group of FARC rebels, mostly women, escorting the 15 hostages. It then shows them binding the hands of the hostages with plastic cuffs. One hostage, a Colombian soldier, believing the cameraman is a real journalist, angrily complains about his 10 years in captivity. In fact, the cameraman was actually a Colombian soldier posing as a journalist accompanying the supposed transfer operation. He was there to distract FARC leaders on the ground by interviewing them. A second hostage can be seen showing his uncontrollable anger against his captors, while Ingrid Betancourt looks drained. Once aboard the disguised military helicopter, the video shows Betancourt and others reacting in surprise and breaking out in tears after the cuffs were removed and the soldiers revealed themselves. Meanwhile, a local FARC commander named Caesar and an additional rebel who boarded the helicopters along with the hostages were persuaded to hand over their pistols and were subdued in the air by Colombian forces. The Colombian soldiers had been tracking the hostages for months and infiltrated the rebel group. U.S. Quick Reaction Forces stood by to respond, ready to be summoned by panic devices in the helicopters, but the rescue went forward without a shot fired and with every life saved.